plug and play, we're very different from traditional accelerators or like a Y Combinator, right? Because I think three things set us apart. One is we're stage agnostic. So we don't care if you're like seed or pre-seed or Series A. We don't care because at the end of the day, what we care is if you can make Walmart and Nike happy, right? So that's the first difference. The second piece is we're equity free. So for example, YC might charge you take 7% of your equity and write you like a $400,000 safe. But we don't need none of that, because our programs are sponsored by our corporate partners.
Hi, Emery. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm doing real well, and thanks for having me.
Yes.
Yeah.
よろしくお願いします。
どうぞよろしくお願いします。
Perfect. Amazing. He can speak Japanese. Amazing.
ちょっと。
ちょっと。So, please introduce yourself. What do you do in Silicon Valley?
Of course. I work for a venture capital firm, and the firm's name is Plug and Play. And we're very traditional VC firm, but we do a lot of things more than just venture capital. And to give you a simple rundown, is that I would say we do three things. First of all, we are a venture capital firm, and we're named the most active investor in the world in the past 3 years, according to PitchBook. Meaning, we write more checks than anybody else. About 250 investments around the year across 25 different industry verticals. So, and we were the early few checks into Google, Dropbox, PayPal, Lending Club, and 40 other unicorns. And right now, we have 2,000 active portfolio companies. And over 10% of the portfolio is valued more than $100 million. So that's the first piece, venture capital, right? And the second piece of what we do, and in my mind, that's truly what set us apart, is corporate innovation services. And what that means is we now work with 620 of the world's largest corporations.
Like enterprise?
Like enterprises. Okay. So I'm talking about Costco, Walmart, Nike, and so on, United Airlines, Marriott, so on and so forth. So essentially, these corporations, they rely on Plug and Play as their external innovation partner. And essentially, you can view us as a matchmaker or broker in between this relevant startup solutions and corporations, their business challenges, focus areas. So for example, like customer experience, so on and so forth. And these corporations, they will come to us to look for those new technology vendors to work with, or to even invest or for merger acquisition opportunities. So that's the second piece, corporate innovation, right? The last piece of what we do is we're also an accelerator. And we run 120 programs in 67 cities across 27 countries. And yeah, we have a physical office location in 67 cities. And in 2024 alone, we have accelerated 2,744 startups. So that's in a nutshell of what Plug and Play does.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I didn't know that Plug and Play is a kind of a matchmaker between huge enterprise and startups. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, because a lot of the times, imagine if you're, say if you're AI for customer support startup, like 5-people team, right? And you want to land a meeting with the decision maker, say CIO or CDO of Nike. It's probably going to take you 6-7 months to even have that meeting. But with Plug and Play, we can set up the stage for you, and you can have 10 meetings in 2 weeks. So we really like speed up the process and have you to meet those enterprise clients in a super efficient way to kind of supercharge the process, right? And for corporations, they also get to meet amazing founders that can truly impact their bottom line. Yeah.
I see. So the reason why Plug and Play can do this special matchmaking? Because of it, they have long history and trust.
Yes, we have Plug and Play was founded in 2006, but I can give you a quick story of how this story began, right? So our founder and CEO, Saeed Amidi, he was a very traditional business guy, and he still owns 10% of University Avenue, which is a little ways off from a small campus in the Bay Area called Stanford, right? So back in the days, a lot of founders approached Saeed looking for office space. And the first startup was a small payment solution company called PayPal. So as Peter Thiel and Max Levinchen approached Saeed looking for office space. And Saeed's like, yeah, these two young guys, I'm not sure if you can afford the rent. So why don't we do this? $200,000 of rent up front for 2 years. I will reinvest half of that back into PayPal for equity. So that was Saeed's first investment. And PayPal was acquired by eBay in 2002 for $1.5 billion. So not bad first investment, right? And the second company that approached Saeed was also a small team, and it was a search engine company called Google. So it's Larry and Sergey, same story, $200,000 of rent up front, half of that back into Google for equity. And that made Saeed a good fortune in a matter of a few years. So that's when Saeed realized, well, this is so much more profitable than real estate, right? And so in 2006, he acquired a big building in Sunnyvale, California, and founded Plug and Play because he wanted to take this business model to a much larger scale, providing funding and office space to founders in the Bay Area. So that's how Plug and Play started.
Thank you.
And there was a lot of amazing stories to tell. Yeah.
So I want to know about yourself. So Emery, so what is your responsibility at Plug and Play?
Absolutely. So my job, like I said, we're like a matchmaker or broker between the startups and the corporations, right? So my title is head of corporate innovation. So I will spend 30 to 40% of my time sourcing and work with the right startups, right? And the rest of my time are mostly working with innovation leaders from different corporations. So Walmart, Costco, Nike, like I mentioned, those are all my clients. And those logos are, also paying customers for us. So they would hire my team to source the relevant technologies. So yeah, that's kind of my day-to-day job. And we do this in the form of what we call deal flow service.
Deal flow service.
Deal flow, yes. So basically, say if you're looking for, if your focus area is you're looking for a traceability solution in the supply chain, you will give us that request and we will come up with a collection list of say 20 startups in a matter of a week or two. And we'll go from there. And we'll make 4 to 6 introductions based on the needs of this corporation. So, and from there, we're looking for tangible results, POCs, pilots, or even full commercial agreements. So I joined Plug and Play last year after my MBA here in the Bay. Yeah, so it's been less than a year, but I'm loving it so far.
Like exciting and sometimes overwhelmed. Wow, a lot of information. Every single day, new AI software, new function, right? So how do you manage your knowledge?
I think one of the best ways to stay organized is to get up early and set your goals for each day and also for the week. So every morning I have a checklist of the things I want to do. I prioritize that. I do that every day. It's like a habit. But it only takes like 2-3 minutes to put down the list you want to do. Check each box one by one, right? That's how I just stay organized. And I think at the end of the day, if you love what you do, it becomes fun. I mean, I really enjoy this. Yeah.
I love that. Do you remember something unique experience or something matching and which made you so happy? Oh, I did a good job like that.
Yeah, without giving too much details, because we do have a confidentiality agreements with these corporations that we can't disclose their individual secrets of what startups they're engaging. But I would say no 2 days are the same. And I'm seeing a lot of really cool solutions, right? One of the startup that I work with, for example, is called Bonafide AI.
Bonafide AI.
Bonify AI, yeah. So what they do is basically they are information exchange platform for generative commerce. And what that means is, like, I would say most of the audience nowadays, when you plan a trip, Google maybe not your first. I mean, for me, instead of Google, I would go to Perplexity or even like GPT looking for recommendations, right? For example, if I plan a trip to Ibiza, Spain, what hotel should I live in? What are the best resorts within my budget, right? And you can use AI to help you kind of to look for the right hotels to live in. But if you try that, you will see a lot of hallucinations because these AIs are like really, really smart kids. They can make mistakes, right? Sometimes they don't even have the accurate information, right? So I think information exchange platform is really needed between these big corporations, like Marriott or Hyatt, and also customers, right? Because it could be frustrating if you book the hotel that doesn't even exist, right? So this startup is set to solve that problem. Yeah, this is one of the exciting startups that we cut them a check like 3 months ago, but this is only one example. We have so many more. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, so you look super healthy and you are a great morning person to make to-do list.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, have you ever had like what can I say, burnout? Because of here is Silicon Valley, many visionary people, founders, they are sometimes burnout, or I need to, what can I say, digital detox, no more social media like that. How about you?
I think burnouts are pretty universal if you're too deep in the work for too long. I think the key is to don't be stressed. I think that's my number one advice. And if you're asking for more, how can we not to be stressed one is you gotta have the right mindset. You know, life is an experience, right? There's nothing to be afraid of or to be stressed about. You can just put in the work. Second is make sure you have your own downtime, like unplug, right? Go travel, go to some music festivals, go to Napa. Like I just came back from a winery tour over the long weekend. So yeah, just have those times to kind of unplug and separate yourself from day-to-day work is really important. So work-life balance is truly important. Yeah.
How about food?
How about food? Luckily, my company, we serve breakfast and lunch, and they change the menu every day, and I love it. So I just try to eat healthy. But for dinners, I just, I would say half of my time, I would just go out there and have dinners with my friends. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Healthy life and good food.
Yeah.
Important.
Sure. That's very important. Yeah.
Thank you. So lastly, do you have any pain point? Like, I wish I could change, or I wish I could someone's help, blah, blah, blah. Could be, I can help you, or our audience also can help you.
That's a great question. I mean, I am pretty happy with my life. I don't have any big pain points, but it's just, there's so many like small things in life that you have to deal with. For example, your car needs a service, right? You have to manage your calendar, and you have to remember a lot of different nuances in life. And sometimes I forget. So if there's a personal kind of AI assistant that really knows me and knows my priorities, kind of remind me. So whenever I save, like I have like 24/7 assistant I can talk to, be like, hey, remind me this. Or I gotta do this.
Is this like your iPhone?
Yeah, this is my. No? I don't have that, but I wish there's kind of a really smart, intelligent personal assistant. Yeah. That would be great. I think someone's already working on that. So.
Okay, if you are a founder who has this wonderful solution AI software, please reach out to Emery, and not only this software. So you are always looking for talented startup,
yes.
right?
we are always on the lookout for the best, the brightest minds, right? And I think plug and play, we're really focused on enterprise solutions. So if you're building AI or SaaS solution for enterprises, for whatever industry you want to focus on, because we have 25 different industry verticals. And for example, retail, right? We work with all the big name retailers. Or if you, for travel and hospitality, for semiconductor, for energy, for real estate, we have all the biggest corporations. Not all of them, but a big subset of them are looking for good solutions every day. So please reach out. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay.
Plug and Play, we host about 800 events globally. 800 like online and offline in different office locations. If you're a startup and you want to kind of get either funding or advices or mentorship or even just connections in your target customer, maybe you can apply for our accelerator. Those are really great. And we are very different from traditional accelerators or like a Y Combinator, right? Because I think three things set us apart. One is we're stage agnostic. So we don't care if you're like seed or pre-seed or Series A. We don't care because at the end of the day, what we care is if you can make Walmart and Nike happy, right? So that's the first difference. The second piece is we're equity free. So for example, YC might charge you take 7% of your equity and write you like a $400,000 safe. But we don't need none of that because our programs are sponsored by our corporate partners. So we're very corporation oriented. So for startups, it's free BD. It's free business development. And the last piece is we're industry verticalized. So, and we're not the judge of these accelerators. The Nikes and Costco's innovation officers, they will be the judge of who goes into each batch, right? So it's not us thinking, oh, this is a really cool solution. Definitely we have a say, but at end of the day, it's the corporate partners. They are the decision makers, and it's the market telling us. Yeah.
Amazing. I didn't know that.
Yo, now you know?
Yes. Super different than other accelerators.
Yeah, so I think if you can part of the program, it's a lot of great benefits at no cost. Yeah. So
good to know. Please check Plug and Play website and also LinkedIn. Okay. The 3 key takeaways from the conversation with Emery, part 1. 1. Plug and Play is a super connector between startups and global enterprise. Plug and Play isn't just a VC firm. It's a matchmaker between startups and 620 global enterprise like Walmart, Nike, and United Airlines. Through its corporate innovation service and accelerator programs, startups can bypass the usual 6 months wait and get in front of decision makers in days, unlocking real pilots and commercial opportunities first. Example, a 5-person AI startups can meet 10 enterprise clients in 2 weeks with Plug and Play help. 2. Stage agnostic, equity-free, and enterprise-focused accelerator. Unlike YC or Techstars, Plug and Play's accelerator is equity-free, corporate-sponsored, open to all stages from pre-seed to Series A, evaluated by corporations, not just internal mentors. This makes it especially attractive for B2B or enterprise AI SaaS startups looking for pilot opportunities and scale. We only care if you can make Walmart or Nike happy. 3. Burnout prevention and the power of daily habits. Emery stays grounded in the fast-paced world of innovation by starting each day with 2 minutes checklist, prioritizing self-care, example, music festival, Napa trips, using GPT and Perplexity for daily AI-powered productivity. He reminds us that mindset and balance a key to long-term success in Silicon Valley. Life is an experience. That's nothing to be afraid of stress about. Okay, thank you so much for watching our episode today. We hope today's conversation will help your future and career. If you like it, please subscribe us and give you a like. The next episode is the conversation with Emery Part 2. Please stay tuned. Bye bye. またね. Thank you.